The evening sun was sliding low across the prairie, painting the hills in fire and shadow. Out on the far end of his land, where the wooden fence dipped toward the creek, Thomas McGraw tightened the last wire and tugged hard, testing its strength. His shoulders ached, his shirt clung to his back with sweat, and dust streaked his face like war paint. The ranch had been quiet too long, too quiet since Mary passed 2 winters ago, and sometimes the silence threatened to break him more than the work did. He slung his gloves into the saddlebag and started back toward the house. The clapboard homestead stood lonesome on the rise, weather-worn and plain. No laughter carried from its windows anymore, no soft humming while supper cooked. Just the creak of the windmill, the rattle of shutters in the wind, and his boots on the porch. That night, as he was trimming a stub of candle and setting a skillet on the stove for his usual beans, he heard it, a knock. Sharp, hesitant, then another, lighter. Thomas froze. Folks didn't just come knocking out here unless it was trouble or necessity. He set down the skillet, tugged his revolver loose from the table out of old habit, and opened the door. On the threshold stood a young woman, her bonnet dusty, her dress faded from wear. Her hands were knotted in front of her apron, twisting with nervousness. And behind her, peeking from the folds of her skirt, was a little girl, no older than 6, with wide hazel eyes that caught the last of the daylight. The woman's voice came soft, almost a whisper. They said you needed a cook." For a long moment Thomas didn't answer. He took in the scene, the way her shoulders hunched as though bracing for rejection, the child's small hand clutching her mother's dress. He noticed their shoes worn thin, their travel dust, the hollow look of people who had been searching too long for a place to rest. He cleared his throat. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Caldwell in town," the woman replied. "She said you might be hiring. I can cook. Clean, too. We don't need much." Her eyes flicked toward her daughter as though apologizing for bringing her. The little girl stared up at him with an openness that rattled something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Thomas leaned against the doorframe. "What's your name?" "Anna," she said, steadying her voice. "Anna Miller. And this here is Lily." The girl gave a tiny curtsy, then ducked behind her mother again. Silence stretched between them. Thomas was a man used to caution. He didn't let strangers onto his land without reason. Yet the memory of his cold suppers and the echoing loneliness of the house pressed heavy on him. He hadn't thought about hiring anyone. Too much trouble, too many mouths to feed. But looking at them now, the decision felt less like logic and more like something deeper, something long buried. Finally, he stepped back. "Come inside." The kitchen smelled faintly of dust and wood smoke. Anna moved with careful steps, her daughter trailing behind. Thomas gestured to the table. "Sit." Anna perched on the edge of the chair, hands folded tight. "I can start right away. You won't regret it. You cook?" "Yes, sir. I was a housekeeper before," her voice faltered. "Before my husband passed." Thomas nodded, saying nothing. He busied himself with kindling the firebox. The little girl climbed into the chair beside her mother, eyes roaming the room. She seemed curious, not frightened, though the silence was thick enough to choke on. Anna finally broke it. "I can pay my keep. All I ask is a roof. My daughter and I can stay out in the barn if that suits you." Thomas turned, studying her. "The barn? No. You'll take the spare room. House is big enough." Anna blinked, surprised by his firmness. "We won't be a burden." "You won't," he said simply, though in truth he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, her or himself. By the time the fire caught, Anna had taken over the kitchen as though born to it. She asked where the flour and salt were kept, and within minutes the smell of fresh cornbread mingled with beans simmering in the pot. Thomas found himself leaning in the doorway, arms folded, watching the rhythm of her hands. She moved with quiet determination, not wasting emotion, not asking for help. Lily padded over to him, small bare feet soundless on the floorboards. She tugged at his sleeve. "Are you the cowboy, mister?" Thomas arched a brow. "Cowboy? My mama said we'd go find the cowboy who lives out here all alone." "That's you, right?" He grunted, a sound halfway between agreement and amusement. "Reckon it is." The little girl smiled, a tooth missing from her front row. Something loosened in his chest at that sight. She was bold in the way only children could be, and her presence filled the quiet house like sunlight breaking through shutter cracks. When supper was ready, Anna served without fuss, placing a generous plate before him. The cornbread was golden, the beans rich with flavor he hadn't tasted in years. He ate slowly, trying not to reveal how much he savored it. "You're hired," he said at last. Anna's shoulders sagged with relief. Lily clapped her hands once, then giggled. That night, after they had settled into the spare room, Thomas stood on the porch, staring out at the horizon. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The sky stretched black and endless above him. For the first time in years, the house behind him wasn't empty. He could hear the faint murmur of a mother soothing her child to sleep. And though he told himself it was just practical, a cook to ease the burdens of the ranch, a part of him already knew it was more than that. Something had shifted, and nothing, he suspected, would ever be quite the same again. Morning light slipped over the hills, spreading gold across the prairie. For the first time in years, Thomas woke to the sound of life inside his house. Not just the creak of the timbers or the wind through the shutters, but the faint clatter of pans, the low hum of a woman's voice, and a little girl's laugh spilling through the doorway. He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The smell of biscuits baking drifted in. For years, breakfast had been nothing more than black coffee and maybe a strip of jerky. Today it was different. When he walked into the kitchen, Anna was bent over the stove, hair loose around her shoulders. Lily sat at the table, swinging her legs and humming as she played with a little rag doll. "Morning," Anna said without turning, her voice softer than the dawn itself. "Morning," Thomas rumbled, taking a seat. He wasn't used to such warmth filling his house. It unsettled him, but in a way that wasn't unwelcome. Anna set down a plate before him, eggs, biscuits, fried potatoes. He stared at it like it was some miracle. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he muttered. "It's no trouble," she answered gently. "It's what I do." Days passed, and the rhythm of the ranch began to change. Anna worked with quiet strength, keeping the place in order, while Lily followed Thomas like a shadow. She rode with him in the wagon, asked endless questions about cattle and fences, even helped gather eggs from the henhouse. One evening, as they returned from the pasture, Lily reached for his hand. Her small fingers curled trustingly around his calloused palm. "Are you always alone out here, Mr. Thomas?" He swallowed hard. "I was." "Not any more," she said with childish certainty. Those words settled into his chest and stayed there long after the sun went down. But small towns carry long tongues. When Anna went to town for flour, Thomas rode alongside to keep her safe. They could feel eyes following them from the general store to the livery. Whispers trailed behind, widow woman, cowboy, living under his roof, improper. That night Anna lingered by the fire, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I don't want to bring you trouble," she said quietly. "People will talk." Thomas studied her, the flicker of lamplight catching the curve of her cheek, the fear in her eyes. "Let 'em talk," he said simply. "This ranch is mine. Who I keep here is my business." Her lips parted in surprise, then softened into the faintest smile. As spring warmed the prairie, the three of them settled into something that felt almost like family. Thomas caught himself waiting for Anna's voice at supper, listening for Lily's laugh in the yard. He had sworn after Mary's death that his heart was buried in the grave with her. But here it was, beating steady and new, rising with each dawn. One evening, Lily dozed by the hearth while Thomas mended tack at the table. Anna brought him a cup of coffee, her hand brushing his as she set it down. The touch lingered, unplanned, yet neither of them moved away. "Thomas," she began, voice barely more than a whisper, "you've done more for us than I can repay." He looked at her, really looked, seeing not just a cook or a widow, but a woman who had carried her burdens with grace, who had brought warmth back into his home. "You don't owe me a thing, Anna," he said. Then, after a pause, his voice rough with honesty, "but I'd be proud if you'd stay. Not just for the work. For me. For Lily." Her breath caught. For a heartbeat the world was silent but for the crackle of the fire. Then she reached across the table and laid her hand in his. "We'd like that," she whispered. Weeks later, the gossip in town was still there, but it no longer mattered. Thomas rode in with Anna at his side and Lily bouncing on the wagon seat between them, chattering about the foals in the pasture. The widowed Cowboy was no longer alone. And when they returned to the ranch that evening, the prairie spread wide and free around them, the sky painted with 1,000 colors of hope. Thomas McGraw, who had once thought his heart was finished, knew he had been given a second chance, a new beginning with a woman who had knocked softly at his door and whispered, "They said you needed a cook." She had brought more than cooking. She had brought life back into his home. And as Lily laughed, calling him Pa without hesitation, Thomas smiled, knowing the house on the hill was no longer a place of silence, but a home filled with love.